From journalism to planning to banking and to politics, he is a man who didn't look at the things just from the outside and critiqued it or evaluated it. He is a man who walked inside and experienced things himself. The advantage of talking to him is that you can get a view while you look at the things from outside, but then you can also probe the things from inside, and maybe you can try and find it out whether it was a seamless movement from outside to inside or there are some glaring mismatches. Thank you, Dr. Haseeb Drabu, for coming to our studio.
Pleasure.
You have been writing for Greater Kashmir for many, many years now. You have written, on a variety of topics: culture, power projects, poets, personalities, politics, policies, whatnot. Over these years, when you see where we right now are, do you think that your understanding of the situation, of the people, of the themes that you have dealt with, it has sharpened, or do you think somehow that you have tired yourself up, you're exhausted, or it has been a roller coaster ride where maybe you have confused some of the readers, made them angry, and you yourself now try to figure out how to make it a one seamless thread which has a degree of connectivity?
Well, let me take over the connectivity part. I have largely focused on Kashmir. I've been writing columns for Mint and others which are on economy, which is something I professionally am qualified to do. But as a Kashmiri, yes, in GK I have largely written on Kashmir. So that's the connection. It's about different aspects of Kashmiri life, whether it is economic, political, social, cultural, whatever. The theme is that. The change that I have seen in myself, of course, is that I think when I started off writing in the early 90s, which is now 30, 40 years thing, I knew it all, right? So I would kind of pontificate. And I wasn't too bothered about whether people will understand or not. But it was something that I wanted to genuinely put it out in the public domain and take it from there.
You wouldn't walk out of yourself?
No. Now, having written it and also having been in public life for a brief period, being in politics, being in, also in positions of power and authority like in the J&K Bank and the ministry and so on and so forth, my desire today is to communicate. So the tonality of my writing is about trying to communicate rather than pontificate. I think that's a major change I have.
So that is the shift from pontificating, you now want to communicate. In your recent communication, you changed the name of your column from Back to Basics to State Subject. On a lighter note, state isn't there. So somebody would, giggling with himself, say, what's the subject matter?
So it's really, yes, I'm glad somebody has picked up this nuance. Yes, there have been 3 sets of columns I've kind of written. One is, of course, has been Back to Basics, which has been the longest one. For a brief while, when the society was through a throes of crisis, I wrote a series of columns called Posts for Posterity.
I'll come to that also.
Yeah, it may be presumptuous, but that was the whole desire was that. Today, it's an effort, obviously a very, very direct effort to reclaim something that we've lost, a state subject. So it is layered, it is the state and the subject. So that is one part of it. It's also, you can interpret it as subjects related to the state. Nomenclature-wise, it's a UT, but that's an administrative thing. For whatever it's worth, it is still a state. You may administratively run it as a union territory. So the whole idea was A, to reclaim the past, to keep it alive in the common domain, that there is something called a state subject, no matter how you want to interpret it. And it also in some ways specifies the kind of writing that you will expect in this with a certain point of view, which is a Kashmir-centric viewpoint.
In the same column, I think in fact earlier also, you have underlined this thing that right now we might do certain things symbolically or maybe some incremental movement towards a better politics, but to regain or restore or recover that status quo ante, it needs a long and hard struggle. Can you give us a loose cartography of that struggle?
So one of the things I have been consistently trying to point out, not just in my writings, but even in my interventions in the Legislative Assembly, is this whole thing of, is going back to the past the best way to address the future? I think this is the fundamental question which we as a thinking society must ask ourselves. And it's important to kind of put it out. It may seem politically regressive today, but the fact remains that status quo ante may not be the best way to address the future. This is the premise. I may be wrong. There may be difference of opinion on this. I'm not saying that don't do status quo ante. All I'm saying is, please examine that and see how that will help you in future. Is the way to go back to the past to define the future? No. Where it gets some intellectual heft is from the premise that the status that we had, which became an identity, that is separate. What was it for? It was never for Kashmiris. So the 370 that we talk of, it may have grown into something else. If you go back to the origins, it was a provision in the Government of India Act 1918 and 1935, which was done for all federal provinces. कि यही तो 373 exact lift of that. It was never created, written, negotiated for Kashmir, never.
It wasn't Kashmir specific.
No, not at all. This is the biggest, which I have been struggling to explain. I said this in the assembly also, way before Article 370 was there. That is one part. Second part, have you leveraged it enough, what we had? If we had a particular position, should we have not leveraged it in terms of our politics? No, economics. Economics itself was a big thing we could have leveraged. Nothing. What did we do? The only leverage that we ever took was to do the land reforms of 1948, which was the big Estates Landed Abolition Act. We took cover under 370, which had prevented the fundamental rights to be included in our for J&K, because what would happen is right to property was a fundamental right. So anybody whose land you had appropriated would have gone to court and got a stay on it. So you had leveraged that. After that point, tell me one example, you can put it in public domain, where you have used the advantages, the provisions of 370 to do this. Number one. Having said that, is it even relevant? What were we talking about? If you look at it in terms of markets, there are fundamentally 3 or 4 markets: land market, credit market, labor market. Your labor market has always been free. You have always had labor from Bihar, from Punjab, you would go as labor to Himachal, Hatho. That whole notion of Hatho used to be there, right? Labor markets were linked. Look at credit markets, always linked. You had SBI here, you had PNB here, you had JK Bank outside. So credit markets itself were linked. So we are talking of a restricted capital market again. You had foreign capital coming in, you had domestic capital coming in, you had regional capital coming in, all was there. So it was all about land. Fundamentally one market. Which Kashmiri had land at that point of time? None.
Very few.
A handful of families. What was the protection for? And there are other forms where you can do the land market protection. Going forward, is that the main issue? Doesn't seem so. Maybe it is, maybe it is not. But the only point I'm trying to make is that are there better ways to do a new social contract, going back to what we started off with ourselves, our government, and saying this is what we want, this is the charter I want. What my views on my identity are. See, 370 became my identity, shorthand for identity. I was a Kashmiri before 370, I will be a Kashmiri after 370. It doesn't make me a Kashmiri, yes. It became a symbol of my identity, a shorthand, Dafa 370. That was the thing, that's a different value, which is a value which you have imposed on it. You have vested it with that. It doesn't intrinsically have that value. So I'm saying, can you look at a new social contract relevant to your times, whereby you look at what are the 5, 7 big issues that your society today is facing, and how do I create a new social contract which will come within the ambit of a asymmetric federation to allow us to have a contract first with my government, which is my state government, and then the state government has a social contract and a model with the union government, right? That's how it forms.
So can we then say that this 370 or 35A or whatever the constitutional arrangement there was in place was one, the legacy of past? It was more of a political slogan. It had to do something with our own emotional, emotional personality as a society and as a political entity. Now that all of it has changed, is it that this, as a society, Kashmiris will have to sit down and think of profound ways of where do we go from here into the future, rather than each time, sort of having that nostalgia about the past and grieving about it? So if we have to go into the future, what will be that first step that we need to take?
Introspection. And we need to introspect. We need to talk to each other. We must communicate. We can't take positions which are, imputed positions. He is anti-370, he is pro-370. Those binaries will not help. We need to introspect. And there are some fundamental moral introspections you must do.
So as Dr. Haseeb Drabu, who has been in the political space, who has been in the cultural space, who's being seen as somebody who has that intellectual substance, can we expect this introspection, talking to one's own self and to the people around? Can you begin it with yourself?
For sure. In fact, in GK itself, I've written a couple of columns on, navel gazing. The French call it somnambulism. You look at yourself and crudely call it the navel gazing. So you begin to look at yourself and, understand and try to introspect. Not just introspect at a personal level, but at a social level. There are things which are morally right, because I think one of the profound things we have, which we must value, is that this is a society which was hugely liberal, hugely tolerant, and both aspects we have lost. There is absolutely no appetite for any deviation of thought. It may not be a subversive or a submissive thought, just another thought. I am entitled to a view. You cannot castigate me or anybody else for that matter just to have a thought, because you have hundreds and thousands of years of history of assimilation of a society where you have absorbed, assimilated, thrown out, renewed, and reworked to arrive at a very peculiar system which I think was very valuable. So if you were to call it the value system of the society, we have somewhere lost it for pecuniary gains in the political space of present life. Of course 370 has been misused. Of course 370 has not been leveraged enough. But the fact remains that it was ingrained in me, and I said this that time also, that knowing the full reality of 370, nothing was left of it, I felt humiliated. And I remember there was this couplet of Praveen Shakir, who I kind of at that point was giving me a lot of solace. I felt I had been stripped of something. Knowing fully well there was nothing in it. There was no protection. By 1986, even the residuary powers had gone. We had a constitution which could not be altered. We had a head of the state who was nominated, not elected. The cores of it had gone. In fact, as early as 1961, Gulzar Nanda, who was the Home Minister of India, said in the Parliament, it's a tunnel and it is gone. So that way, one was conscious of that. Maybe not everybody is. Even I felt. Because
but this message, this announcement carried a message for all of us.
I felt humiliated. There was no need for me to feel humiliated. In fact, I am 62 years old. I have spent 40 years outside of J&K, right? I've been in Bombay, I've been in Delhi, and so on and so. But that thing, it felt very, very internal. It felt like a personal loss. And that has to be, it was a symbol. And you have destroyed that symbol. Now, healing will take some time, but I must also find a creative way to move away from being healed to now being proactively engaged with my own future, with not just my future, but with my children's future, with my generational future. It's a responsibility on us. Going back to what you were saying earlier, it is a responsibility for me to start thinking afresh. That has lasted us 50 years. It hasn't protected the identity.
So when we start thinking afresh, when you say that self-introspection, communicating with each other, in that there are certain things which become as barriers, which become as spoilers. One is that we have these rampant perceptions about each other, right or wrong, but they create a barrier. One of the perceptions in which you also might have encountered that in our society is that here is a man called Dr. Haseeb Drabu, who was an intellectual, who, as you put it, who would pontificate. Then he becomes a part of a politics that then becomes a part of a larger politics, which resulted into this thing. Do you think that when some people said that he was in the middle of the things, whatever was happening here, and a lot of accusations then fly around? How do you deal with that, one, personally, and second, do you think that you owe not an answer or apology, but you owe a communication with your own people on that here I might have been wrong, not with a wrong intent, but I did things which went wrong. Maybe here something else was in my mind, but at least an honest, courageous, bold talk takes place so that people get to know each other and without getting angry about each other. And we have that lot of grace and humility to ourselves that even if we get some very difficult questions, we are ready to answer that.
Yes, I mean, in a way, I have done that a few times, not in terms of either an apology or an explanation, but saying that I have forgone the right to comment on this issue. I've said this in a GK column, saying that, I don't want to comment on this, I take a position because I don't think I have the moral right. Coming to specifics, I would put in largely two buckets. There are interventions which I did in the economy, and there are interventions which I happen to be a part of in the politics. In the economic sphere, I find, you asked me this question, how do I deal with it? Is because when I did something, let's say we formed Chenab Valley power projects, I was accused of selling the power to Government of India. So I sit on a high moral position and say, I don't understand. So it doesn't bother me. The reason being, through that mechanism, I actually got back 50% of the power projects that had gone to GUI way back in '96. But people didn't understand that. Not that I also, like say GST, that how in the process of getting GST in 2017, I got a presidential order issued which went back to 56. I thought that was the greatest contribution I had made to rework the whole modality, because what had happened was all constitutional amendments from that time would come from top and probably the government would next day. We got the presidential order issued after it was discussed in the assembly. Not the generic GST order, but a specific order, which it's alive, it's there in the history books, where it was that J&K has the right to taxation under section 5 of its constitution of J&K. It was acknowledged for the first time in the history of these amendments. So I was very proud that I had achieved this, and it took a lot of doing to do that. But I am being accused of being the guy who robbed the state of the autonomy. Even so, that I had ensured that we retain the octroi, which no other state had retained, when we come into J&K, so that we still maintain that. And there was a special exception made. There were minor exemptions also that, 90% of the staff of GST will be from J&K, this, that, and the other, all that was done. And I thought I would be really kind of appreciated for this, but then those kinds of things I attribute to lack of understanding and knowledge. So I have a comfort that I know what I'm talking about. So that part is one part.
So how do you think that once this perception has taken root, so how essential it is for people like you, who have been a part of things going on, to be in this society, to be seen well, in the midst of our society, and anybody can walk in and say, Drabu Sahab, I have this question, with a good intention. Because when you say this social contract, profound thinking, it means it should happen at a popular level. It can't be a few people.
Ecosystem, it can't be an echo chamber.
How can I say with a degree of confidence that Dr. Haseeb Drabu wants to be a part of that ecosystem for the rest of his life? No,
of course, I cannot not do it. All I'm saying is that, yes, it is very deeply disturbing. What has helped me is I've not been in Kashmir, so I don't kind of get accosted, but I see it off the time on the social media. Social media anyway is very toxic, so it's lost its whole thing. But yes, my belief is, and this is what I've learned over the last maybe 5-10 years, is that time will tell. And there'll be a time and occasion. Don't preempt it and try to defend yourself or not. No. There are occasions like this is an occasion where it has come up organically to talk about it. The other part, when I came in briefly into politics in 2014, 15, I was a finance minister. People spend their entire political careers and then rise to a thing. I came in, walked in, and even prior to that, I happened to be selected by the party leadership at that point of time to negotiate with the BJP. I have written this upfront, exonerating everybody of the responsibility, not about myself, that let's say it was an idea which came from the party chief Mufti Sahab, who had a view We had not thought of it. I had contested election completely on an anti-BJP platform. Then I went and did negotiation with BJP. Now, why he chose me, I would not hazard a guess, but I had absolutely no relations with BJP. I didn't know anybody. In my years in Delhi, in Planning Commission, Economic Advisory Council of the Prime Minister, or wherever else I was, I had relationships and friends. Like Dr. Manmohan Singh was somebody who recommended me to J&K State. I didn't know Mufti Sahab. It was Manmohan Singh Sahab who actually called Mufti Sahab and said, "You take this gentleman, he's very good," and whatever else and all that. So I had no relationships there. But then I got to know these people, engage with them for 3-4 months and stuff like that. So in a sense, I saw this as an execution of an idea that was not mine, but I owned it. And it also in some ways did kind of give me a ego boost, if you like, to say that I could do it. I mean, like the North Pole, South Pole. It was very difficult to do that. And if you read the Agenda of Alliance, it very clearly mentions that, state subjects or 3.7 special status and all that, we protected, so on and so forth. And we had people like Arun Jaitley and others who were involved in all the discussion. Ram Madhav, of course, was there from the RSS side. And there were very engaging 3-4 months of discussions where we tried to understand each other and work out a path. What I had guidelines from my party chief saying, these are 3 things I want. I want you to sign them off. So I took it as a mission, more an intellectual mission than a political mission to deliver what was I wasn't really thinking of the implications of that. I'm being very honest with you. I saw it as a job to be executed and in some way assert my political intellectual prowess and say, I could get the things on the table. Now it requires a certain degree of negotiation, whatever it was, we did that. It didn't work. It was done with good intention, the idea being that you will have to engage with the BJP because they represent the new norm in India. I think that was the premise which Mufti Sahib had started off with. He was not under a compulsion. It was a conviction. When he died, things didn't go on. You can very easily say it was an experiment that failed. I'm willing to take responsibility for it because I was very much there.
So when this experiment, you say that we can say that it failed, it didn't pick off the way you would have assumed it to take off. Can I draw a difference between 2 things? That you took it as an intellectual challenge and you were very happy that you could do it. Is it that your own engagement with the politics harmed the intellectual in you in the final analysis of the things?
Yes and no. A few of my very close friends actually were very unhappy with my joining politics. In fact, I remember I wrote a letter to Sadiq Wahid, which was published in GK, where I did try to explain the entire issue. But in public perception, yes, it certainly dented my credibility as a voice which could be an influential voice. And that's not our intellectual knowledge, but somebody who had a view on the Kashmiri society. It definitely dented that credibility. It also made it very easy for people to throw stones at you and say, he's done that, he's RSS, he's BJP, he's whatever and all that. That doesn't really bother me fundamentally, but yes, to answer your question very directly and openly, it did harm that. But was there an option not to do it? Yes, there was. But perhaps I had by then spent a lot of time trying to pontificate. And there was a voice also coming through, not necessarily from within, but from outside, that why aren't all these good things being put to use? Why can't you go there and do it? And it was not done by someone from J&K. I remember attending a seminar where Jaswant Singh, the late foreign minister of BJP, he was not in power that time, in IIC, and Ashok Jaitley was there, and I was not a young kid, I was in my 30s. And they're saying, this is very, very profound stuff you're talking. Why don't you go there and do something? In fact, the thing came from Dr. Manmohan Singh, who actually told me, if people like you don't go back to Kashmir and join the politics, who else should do it? So in some ways, that also did have an impact, right? You were saying that, if you have some ideas, you can do it. Now, as economic advisor, I did. And I do recognize, and I'm very grateful for that. It's very gratifying for people to talk about the kind of work I did in J&K Bank as economic advisor. The maximum bulk of the criticism against me is on the alliance and the GST, which is as finance minister, which I'm saying that time will tell. I'm willing to say today that yes, I will not today identify the reasons why it failed, that we can leave for another day. But the fact remains that that experiment failed. It could have failed because of me, it could have failed because of BJP, it could have failed because of Mufti Sahib, it could have failed because of anybody else. I will at some point talk about that as well. But
so the failure can be evenly distributed.
It can be not even apportioned. No, we were all in it. Yes, not with the same degree of intensity and whatever. But all I'm trying to say is that there were reasons beyond our control which resulted in this experiment. There were unfortunate things also that happened. So it's a little more granular, little more nuanced than black and white. There's a lot of grays in it, and we have seen that. So there'll be a time and occasion.
So with all your intellectual prowess or Mufti Said's political experience and his own way of looking at politics, would you concede that the situation was bigger than the sum total of your experience and your wisdom?
Yes. Yes, but that invariably will happen. Even if you have the finest bunch of people, you will find that the situation is the sum is bigger than the parts.
So, leaving aside those comments which people offhand make on the social media, you can't always take that seriously because that is not the way to do. But at least can you carry on this conversation with someone like you mentioned, your friend Siddiq Wahid, to substantiate all those things, to leave for posterity what all happened, should have happened, should not have happened. Is there a merit in carrying on that discussions in your own spaces with friends like, say, Siddiq Wahid?
Oh, of course, without doubt. Not that it's not happening. I mean, one does have conversation. In fact, now I'm also beginning to feel that I have attained the glorious thing of being a senior citizen. I have the liberty of, and I miss friends. I've lost a few friends to death. And you suddenly realize that, world is shrinking for you. The people you talk to have disappeared. And so there is a greater need to kind of have a conversation with somebody who is around the same kind of lines that you talk about it without any great moralistic principles or whatever, but just a conversation.
A truth-telling of sorts.
Telling of thoughts. What I have still not kind of reconciled myself to is, should I write what happened? There are two aspects to it. One, I think, as you rightly said, I owe it to the posterity, which is where the column started, Post for Posterity.
I'm coming to that.
Yeah, so that was one part. Second is because I have this, it's a very queasy thing within me, that if I know something in a privileged position, should I disclose it to public? There is a moral issue where I have had lots of
but at least you can share the understanding of it.
Yeah.
Maybe you cannot share the details of the event.
So that one has to find a way, appropriate way, because I've had very intense arguments with some friends, not out of Kashmir, but there was to be a chief economic advisor, Arvind Subramaniam, he was a great friend, and he moved out of government and started writing against government using information that had been done. I reacted to it. I said, you can't do this. So somewhere I have to find a via media whereby I communicate the larger understanding, what was done and what transpired.
Without hurting any moral postulate.
Without breaching any moral principle.
Exactly. Drabu Sahab, this question of posterity, what gives you that confidence that you can still connect to the posterity, and what convinces you that the posterity can connect with you?
I know that I have a confidence that I'll connect to posterity. I see it as purely morikh. It's a simple, non-judgmental. This was morikh shil yakhan. There is a certain element. He will write it wherever he is sitting. Somewhere somebody will, I have no great illusions about it will be read and discussed, no. But somebody leave it there. It may find a use. And if somebody finds it of use, it's not so much about me, it's about his capability and understanding and need to arrive at that and utilize it in whatever way possible. So I, in some ways, am quite content with just putting it out there and saying, these are the posts. In some ways, you can see it also as learnings from life. Because I think I have reached that stage of life where I have spent 60 years and I have some bit of, it's not about, I am not a great believer in wisdom. I'm a great believer in experience. Because experiences are what teach you what life is all about. And I've gone through a wide range of them.
And the moment you share it, it becomes wisdom then for others.
That's right, absolutely.